Welcome back to the realm of Final Fantasy XIV. Truth be told, these were recorded a fair amount of time ago, but I haven't had the chance to record the commentary for them for quite some time. But in the latest patch, which at this point isn't quite so new anymore, 2 new dungeons were added. So today we're going to be queuing up for Expert Roulette and tackling one of those 2. Specifically, of the 2, we're going to be tackling Sohr Kai, if that is how you pronounce it. Sohr Kai is the dungeon that's unlocked in the main scenario, so understandably there may be a few spoilers to it in the dungeon itself, though I won't really be speaking on them personally. Something may still need to be said. Sohr Kai takes place way up in the air in Hraesvelgr's home base, I guess you could say, in a trial that he has set up for you. So we've got to power our way through various fiends from the sky. The first ones you'll find, the 2 gatekeepers, I suppose you can say, are 2 cloud gardeners. They honestly don't do too much of note. However, interestingly enough, they're both asleep when you first find them, and it takes beating on them for a moment before they wake up. Also noticing the squares, the cubes with the thing sticking out of one side, you can tell they're the living wall type enemies. Oh, and the tank feels like pulling everything. That's going to make explaining things a lot easier. So there's a couple different enemies you're going to be fighting in here. There are the Sanctuary Skippers, the Garden Cloud Traps, as well as the Garden Melia and the Enchanted Fan. The Cloud Trap, for one, doesn't do anything much that a Fly Trap doesn't do. The Sanctuary Skipper, I believe, has a poison that he can put on you. It hits in an AoE around the target, and has no cast time or a marker on the ground. It's not a very strong one, though. The Garden Melia, of course, is just a large treant and does treant-like things. And, of course, the Fan is one of the most interesting enemies you'll find in here, as it has both a knockback that's conal in front of it, though not too much to worry about, and when you defeat it, it falls to the ground and stirs up a little tornado of dust. Stepping in this sends you flying. Be careful stepping in those, as it may send you plummeting into the next group of enemies, though not always. This Enchanted Fan we're pulling right here, by the way, will send you falling right into the center of these 3 Cloud Gardeners. Thankfully, they're all sleeping. I honestly hope we get to see more of those Enchanted Fans in the future. I thought it was a neat enemy type, and you only see it in the first third of this dungeon, and that's the only time they ever appear. But from there, we move on to the very first boss of the dungeon, the Chieftain Moglin, of the Moogles that you found up in the sky. I'm sure after the various quests they sent you on, beating the tar out of him is actually going to feel quite good. You can think of this as a mini version of the Good King Moglin fight, as throughout the fight he'll summon in his Palm Guard. It doesn't really matter what order you take them down in, as they all go down fast enough, though they do actually each have their own job and do their own attacks. Once they're all defeated, they don't go away, though, as Chieftain Moglin will eventually cast Palm Praise on, I believe, 3 of the Palm Guard, though there are only 3 on the field. right now. Which, if it hits one of them, they'll be raised back up, and you have to beat them down again. This can be resolved very simply by attacking the Moogles and knocking them out of the small AoEs. 3 more of the Palm Guard appear, so... No, correct that, 4 more. No, just 3. No, 4 more. 4 more. 4 more of the Palm Guard will appear, beat them down just as you did before. You can get back to Chieftain Moglin. Once again, he'll cast Palm Praise, so be sure to knock them out of the AoE markers. There's also the Mogcane ability, which we saw once before, which isn't much to write home about. It simply summons a Mogcane that floats in one part of the arena, and after a brief time shoots out an AoE directly in front of it, in line, and to each side. So just don't stand directly in front, behind, or to each side of it, and you won't be hit by the attack. From that, though, you're granted a piece of equipment as prize, and we can move on, then, to the second leg of the dungeon. No more plants, this time we're dealing with birds, and we're high enough up, the fact that it was night before isn't actually a problem anymore. But here we're dealing with buzzards and a few Anzu eggs. These Anzu eggs have a lot of HP. You can, however, probably DPS one of them down, as I don't do until the very end, because I'm an idiot. But that will give you one less cockerel to deal with. Now, the buzzards, of course, have the typical attacks that buzzards have, so not much to be concerned about there. However, the Sohr Kai cockerels' regular attack is a conal AoE in front of them, so do be very careful where you're standing, or you're going to take a lot of AoE damage. They, as with everything in this dungeon, have a fair amount of HP as well. The mother seems quite angry. And I do believe that may be the father off in the distance. So once again, the tank is going to group all of them up. This isn't something all tanks do, but they're doing it here. Reminder that the cockerels still have their conal AoE, so don't stand in front of them. And, as I demonstrate here, the Sohr Kai Anzus also have a front conal AoE that has a surprisingly wide breadth. Really just think of them as very large, powerful cockerels. Stand behind them, unlike what I did, and DPS them down like you would anything else. Leave the tanking to the tank. We're not quite done yet, as there's one more group of duders that we're going to have to deal with. Thankfully, they don't do too terribly much of note. The Sanahale? We've seen these before on Hullbreaker Island, but they're effectively reskins of the gargoyle statues, which means, of course, that they have a circular AoE that they can place on a target, most likely the tank. The Zarghast, he, as far as I know, doesn't do much of note either. So, Karghast. Couldn't see its first letter of its name. Can't be expected to memorize every one of these names. But for the most part, these can just be DPS down without too terribly much work. And that will actually bring us to, after taking a brief gaze at the dragon insignia, that will take us to the second boss of this dungeon, which I've actually had the luxury of tanking before. Well after this video was recorded, and I was a monk at the time. For the most part, you want to pull him to one side of the arena, and you have a brief moment at the very beginning of the fight to DPS him down fairly hard. However, wait for when he's casting Quasar, and make sure you are lined up in such a way that a directional line AoE targeted at you will go off either end of the arena without hitting any of the walls. Once he flies up in the air, watch for the marker on the ground, run to the opposite side to take as little damage as possible, and then stand off to one side of that AoE. Standing in the middle of that AoE will launch you up in the air and you will take a lot of damage. However, standing off to the side, you will take much less damage and simply get shoved off to the side. Notice that when he crashed down, he actually broke one of the sections of the wall, leaving a small electrified pool of water. You do not want to stand in that, as I believe it paralyzes you as well as adds a very powerful dot to you. So once again, I'm bad, and this is probably the second time I've ever run this dungeon, and I probably should have made an attempt to not place that cloud there. Cloud Call, of course, is signaled by a marker over your head that shows the target it's going to be hitting. Very briefly after that, a cloud will appear over that person's head, which will strike down a large AoE around them, destroying any walls hit by it, and really effectively making everybody move out of the way. You'll notice as the fight goes on, the walls slowly get more and more destroyed, which makes it a fair bit harder to not get knocked into the electrified water on either side. Which is why it's important to point Quasar out of the way, and Cloud Call you'll want to take as far away from the boss as possible, preferably along the far edge in a corner. Also, that may or may not have been one of the first Pegasus mounts that we saw. And does anybody else want all the horse mounts we got turned into Pegasus mounts so they can fly? And during the final leg of the... also of note, that previous boss does have a tank buster, and it does hurt. A lowly monk like myself got taken down to about 10% of my HP every time I got hit by it. Tanks should fare a fair amount better. But after that, we're moving into the third leg of the dungeon, and we start with a couple of Hraesvelgr's broodlings. They don't do a lot, so simply power them down, and we can move on to the next bunch. And by bunch, I mean two. The wyverns here don't do a lot, simply don't get hit by AoEs, and you should really be fine. Be careful, however, because after one of them is killed, a dragon will appear down in the center, placing a large AoE on the ground. This only happens once, and is actually our path to the next pull. Our next pull just so happens to be the dragon who put that AoE on the ground. A blizzard dragon! He fights like most dragons. I wouldn't worry about it too much. Don't stand in things and power him down. Why couldn't that blizzard dragon do something like that huge AoE it did to the ground in the previous fight? Would have mixed things up a little bit. But with that fight over and done, we're actually done with the pulls, and ready to fight the final boss of the dungeon, which just so happens to be Hraesvelgr himself. This fight is actually not very complicated. You're going to be dancing around a little bit from platform to platform, but there isn't any overarching mechanic you have to worry about. I do believe he has a very small cleave, but it is reasonably small, and as long as the tank points him off to one side of the arena, simply standing even 45 degrees to one side should make it so you don't get hit. Throughout the fight, one person will be targeted by a marker. This person is about to get hit by quite a few AoEs. However, you can simply stand out of the way after the first one gets hit and avoid damage from the rest of them. While you're bouncing around the arenas, after he does his large directional AoE, his large directional AoE, by the way, should hit 2 platforms. And it will pretty consistently hit 2 platforms. Since it's a little random which direction he's going to use it in, always keep at least 2 escape paths in mind. So when you're, after that, once you're bouncing from platform to platform, a small holy elemental, was it, spawns. These generally don't do too much of note, but they're good for keeping greased lightning up if you need to. A few other things floating about the arena are a number of ice chunks that you don't want to stand in the way of, and later on in the fight there are also a few dragon heads. Simply pay attention to your surroundings and get out of their way. There's also the raid-wide Blizzard AoE that you saw a moment ago. And otherwise, you're simply tanking and beating down Hraesvelgr. That's effectively the whole fight. You do not need to be careful about where the air gusts will take you. They will never throw you into the void. Even if you jump in one that would point you to seemingly nowhere, it will land you on another platform. So that's one thing you don't have to worry about, thank goodness. If memory serves, Hraesvelgr does have a small tank buster of his own, since I got to tank this guy too. But it's honestly not even as bad as the Pegasus's tank buster. But that's Sohr Kai. Until next time, everyone.